chapter 6. I'm sorry, Genesis chapter 22, Hebrews chapter 6. But I'm going to start, I've not really done this before, but I'm going to start with a verse that I'm going to preach on next week. So the verse that I'm getting ready to read is not this week's verse. And that's found in Hebrews chapter 11. I'm not going to be here long. Just a principle that we're going to deal with next week, but I have to lay the groundwork this week for that. So next week's verse, next week's passage is going to be Hebrews chapter 11. That's one of them. And next week you're going to hear me read, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. I'm reading from the New American Standard Version. The assurance of things hoped for. So I'm not going to get into the assurance of things hoped for this week. This week we're dealing with the word hoped for. A few weeks ago I was meeting with another pastor and he made this statement. And it resonated with me and I've not been able to get away from it. He said this: many people in the church have faith, but they've lost hope. And I thought, what's the difference? You see, a lot of times we don't know the difference between faith and hope. I'm going to deal with that today. Hebrews 11 points out when it deals with faith, because 11 is known as the faith chapter. But it teaches a principle here that's very subtle in regards to hope. And it says what faith is the substance of things hoped for. So that bears the question, what is hope? See, the problem is not necessarily hope, or is not necessarily faith. The problem is hope. Because if faith is the substance of what is hoped for, then a trick of the enemy is to get people to believe but not hope. Because if it's the substance of things hoped for and you rob someone of their hope, then you make their faith empty. Does that make sense? So people say, well, I believe God. I believe God. This is where this God can. God can. God can. That's a form of that. That's a symptom that someone doesn't have hope. Does that make sense? God can. God can. Well, I believe God. Well, I believe God. What are you believing Him for? Because if you take the hope out of the equation, you lose the solidarity of the faith. So what is hope? Glad you asked that. Hope in Romans, actually, Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8, verse 24, talks about hope, and it says, for in hope we have been saved. Now, wait a minute. I thought we were saved through faith. By faith you have been saved, Ephesians says. And that is not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. But Paul says in Romans, for in hope we have been saved. Because they're closely related, but the beginning of faith is in hope. I'm going to talk about the word hope here in a second. He goes on and he says, for in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he already sees? This is what makes hope so tricky. Is because we walk by faith, not by sight, but the beginning of that sight of faith is that which we cannot see. So hope then becomes something definitely intangible. Hope becomes something that is scary. Here's why. Wow. The definition of hope. In the Greek, the word actually is the word elpsis. In fact, go to Hebrews chapter 8. The word is elpsis in the Greek. It means confident expectation and anticipation. The word hope means waiting for something that you know is coming. That's what it means. It's eager expectation. So let's see. We're getting ready to experience this maybe around Christmas time, kids. I mean, Christmas Eve, you know something is in that box. You know something is in that package, and you know it's something good, at least you hope it is. But you have good reason to hope it is. So that whole night you're filled with hope because it's an anticipation of what's coming. And many kids will not be able to sleep that night, and many adults, as a result, will not be able to sleep that night. You see, adults hope that kids will be able to sleep. So that's not really a valid hope. But what the kids are hoping for, there's an excitement because they believe that there's something coming that's good. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the essence of this word, elpsis. And so Hebrews talks about this, talks about the power of hope, the power of anticipation. And it's not visible. But that which becomes reality begins with hope and is structured by faith, which we're going to talk about next week. The power of hope. And I'm convicted. I'm convicted because I, in my own life, often operate with faith devoid of hope. And so I'll use phrases like this even with my kids. And Nathan and Eliana, I'm sorry. I shouldn't do this. They've heard me say this many times. Don't get your hopes up. Don't get your hopes up. How many have said that? How many live that way? You know why? Because we have a culture that the enemy has robbed us of hope. We have a culture that is afraid to hope because, I don't know why, things we believed for didn't happen the way we thought they would or in the time that we thought it would. And so rather than hope and be disappointed, we just decide not to hope.